everyone, and welcome to the first of my series. It's an introduction to botanical illustration course that I have, and I am Marissa with the Art of Ecology. I have a background in environmental science, wildlife conservation, botany, and media and art. So combining the passions of the arts and the sciences, learning more about botanical and scientific illustration is a really great way to hone your artistic techniques and your talents, as well as learn more about the details and the intricacies of plants and animals that you're drawing. So let's get into it. When we start with botanical illustration, we're going to focus on botany, flowers, plants, things like that, as compared to animals. You're going to want a couple of things. Primarily, you're going to want paper or some sort of drawing medium. I have two different papers here. I have a sketching or drawing paper, and I have printer paper here. This is probably what most people just have in their household, but it's very fine in weight. It's a thin sheet of paper as compared to your sketchbook or your drawing paper, which has much, if you feel it, it's a thicker paper than the printer paper. This is important because erasing is a thing that everyone does. And while we aren't going to be erasing a lot at the very start of our sketches are kind of messy, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're erasing and erasing and erasing, eventually you're going to wear right through the paper as compared to sketching paper that can take a little bit more of a beating. You can even get paper that's even heavier, and you can look on the package or on the cover of the sketchbook and look for, it'll say the weight. At the very bottom or on the back, somewhere it'll say the weight of the paper. And if you know you're going to be doing a lot of erasing, or you're going to want some paper that can take a beating, try to go for a thicker, heavier weighted paper. After your paper, you're going to need some sort of drawing, sketching utensil. We're going to start with pencils today. So have whatever sort of pencil you like out. Simple mechanical pencils work just fine for your sketch. Some people like the graphite HB pencils. They're a little more professional and have different tips and different weights as you sketch. The line will look a little different. We're also going to want pens. We're going to be inking over and kind of creating an outline today of our drawing. And you can find, your standard pen will do just fine for it. However, if you want your piece to come out looking a little higher quality or have pens that you can really control the ink flow with, I highly recommend either Micron or these are STA pigment liners. You can find them at craft stores, Michael's. They don't have to be anything fancy. But look at the caps for various numbers, and that's going to be how wide or fat your pen is. So I'll show you. This is the 0.2 versus the 0.8, and you can really see a difference in the thickness of the tip. And they're going to be for different things, the various shading or lining. Personally, I really like to line my flower or my plant in 0.3. I find that to be just the right thickness that I like to create an outline, create that edge without looking really bulky and too over the top. But that's your personal preference. You can play around with the pen thickness. So we've got our pencils, we've got our pens, erasers. I like these kind of like rubber gummy erasers. You could also, if this is what you have, you could use these sorts of erasers too. They'll do just fine. And finally, we're going to want some sort of color. And I have so much color here. We've got our colored pencils. I find that colored pencils are a really great way to get started in illustration, mainly because they're really easy to work with. They have the fine enough tips that you can get some good detail in there. They're easy to blend and shade. Watercolors or pastels may be a little bit more difficult to figure out how they flow and how they blend together. So that's why I like to start with colored pencils and then work your way up into different mediums once you've gotten good practice and you understand the more basics. Any sort of colored pencils will do. I personally like, these are Colore brand colored pencils. I like them because as an environmental artist, I really am conscientious about my materials that I'm using and the waste that I'm producing. These are non-coated, just wooden pencils. So I can sharpen it all the way down to the little nub here, but they're non-coated as compared to, if you think of your standard pencil, you can see it has like a glossy paint over top of it. So these non-coated, just standard wood ones are a little more eco-friendly when you're getting rid of them and the shavings that they produce. So that's why I like them. They also come in a wide variety of colors. You can see my box of colors here. I also like to store my pencils point up. That way, if I stored them point down, if I flipped them this way, you're going to be butting the tip of your pencil up against the bottom here, and that's going to wear the tip out faster than if you store them upright like this. Just a little personal preference. For this class and workshop, I will be using, you can see on the opposite side of my screen, I have my digital sketchbook open. That way I can be drawing alongside of what you're doing and you can see my progress. You can watch how I would do something. You can see as we go through the class, you can kind of see some examples that I offer as opposed to me drawing in my sketchbook and trying to show you awkwardly. I highly recommend digital illustration. It's very fun. It's a creative new medium, and you have a lot of wonderful options in it, from being able to blur things to being able to use different tips. I have pencils, paintbrushes, calligraphy pens, and inking pens, standard pens like a ballpoint, an airbrush, all sorts of things. Erasers, right? Your standard eraser and me erasing it, I'm not going to wear through the paper. So this is also a kind of eco-friendly option of when I'm done, I don't have a physical thing that eventually might get thrown out if I don't like it, or I frame it, it's a beautiful masterpiece, but 20 years from now, my great-grandchildren, it's not going to get thrown out when I move. I'm not producing necessarily any waste. So it's a great option for that too. All right, but now that we have our materials, we need a plant. If you are drawing from nature, drawing from an actual live plant in front of you, you're going to need a plant. If you don't have a plant, that's okay. Google is your best friend. There's so many different pictures out there for you to practice your drawing from. You can also visit my website, The Art of Ecology. I have a ton of photos and prints up there that people are more than welcome to look at and draw from if they're trying to practice. But today I will be drawing from this beauty, and that will be kind of how we're going to be taking a look at the lines. And at the end of this, I'll show you my finished product so you can see kind of from start to finish how it would go. So this will be mine, but you're more than welcome to use whatever plants you have available to you, whether it is a photo, a house plant, or something right from your garden or your community. But now that we have all of that, officially get started. So overall, What is different about botanical illustration versus I want to just draw a flower? I just want a pretty flower drawing that is pretty. Overall, it's the amount of detail and scientific accuracies. Botanical illustration is for the sake of science. You are looking at this plant to study it, to really observe it. A lot of botanical illustrators were the first botanists and plant conservationists that came about before there was photography and things like that. A lot of textbooks will use illustrations still to show those scientific concepts, because illustration can show things that photos just can't. For example, you can see here the two different flower pictures of, you have a whimsical, beautiful, it's a great little piece. Doesn't show anything scientific though, versus the other one where you can see this winter aconite. You can see all of the various plant parts, from the reproductive structures to the rhizomes to the stem, the stalks, the buds. You wouldn't be able to see all of those pieces in nature at once. That's not how plants work. You're not going to be seeing, I mean, if this plant is out of the ground like that and you're seeing the root structures, that's not good. The plant's going to die. And you also won't be seeing things like buds and foliage and flowers, especially if you're drawing trees. You're not going to be seeing those at the same time, but they are great to be able to study from and to be able to compare and recognize patterns. So it's drawing for the sake of science. You still have artistic freedom though. Don't think that you have to make sure every little thing is absolutely perfect. That's not the case. You do have artistic freedom. You can, if you're drawing a flower, if you're just drawing for the sake of drawing, which is a great thing to do to practice. Don't think, I'm not bashing on just drawing for the sake of drawing. No, it's great, do it. But you can change colors, change shape, you can create your own flower. For botanical illustration, your freedom is going to be in terms of depicting plant parts that aren't normally seen at the same time as others, or changing leaf positions, things like that, just to make the aesthetic value of it better. You're still representing the scientific qualities, but you can futz with it a little bit, and it's okay. So to start, we want to make observations. The starting process is not putting your pencil to the paper. You're going to have no idea what you're drawing if you're doing that. But if you look at your plant, you're going to want to ask yourself some questions. So if I have my beautiful houseplant here, I might want to take it out of the pot and say, what do the roots look like? Fortunately, I know what the roots look like of this already. I propagate them in water, so I know what the root structure looks like. I don't have to take it out of the pot. But if you have the ability to do so and then repot it, or if you can go on Google and look, take a look at it. Are there fine little hairs on it, or is it one large taproot like a dandelion would have? How do the roots connect to the base of the plant? Is there a rhizome? Does it grow from a bulb like an iris? Take a look at that. Look at the stems, right? How do the stems differ from other stems that you see? Is it a square stem? You can rub the stem and feel if it's round, if it's square. You can feel, ooh, I see on this stem here that there's tiny little bumps. You'd want to include those bumps and not make a flush stem. Look at the nodes. Nodes are where the leaf here, right? We have our leaf, is going to connect to the stem. And that node can look different in different types of plants. It can be very swollen. It can be almost as if the bud or the leaf is coming straight out of the plant, of the stem. It'll look different. And that'll be really important as you're drawing your plant. You have your stem, how are you going to connect your flower or your leaf to that stem? Depending on the plant, it'll look different. Leaves. What shape are the leaves? Is it a leaflet? Think of a fern. A fern is one huge blade. Think of it as a fern frond is a huge blade. But on that blade are individual little leaflets that connect to form one full leaf. Or a palm frond is another good example of that. Do the leaves, what do the margins look like? And margins are that outer edge here. So this is a beautiful little heart-shaped leaf, and the margins are whole. That means that they are flat, they're smooth, there's no teeth. And teeth are like little tiny points. Teeth. Like think of little kids drawing vampires with the spiky teeth. Are they lobes? Think of like your oak leaf that has lots of lobes, like a mitten has a lobe. Or sassafras leaf one of their leaf types looks like a mitten. What does the leaf look like underneath? For some plants, it's completely different. It could have a dark green top and a fuzzy white bottom. So flip your leaves over, take a look at them. For example, this here is a very glossy top, very deep green. But if I tilt the plant, look at the variation in this leaf. It still is a glossy top, but now we have some other colors. So pay attention to the whole plant, not just one leaf. Take a look at the veins. And the veins are just like our veins. They're carrying nutrients and liquids all throughout the plant. And in the leaf, it could be a really great place to see those veins. So we have here this one that goes down the middle called a midrib. It's right down the middle, looks like a rib. And then branching out from it are tinier little veins. So take a look at your plant. The veins might be very raised and very prominent. Think of a primrose that you can get at like a nursery. They're very, very prominent. Or if you think of this one, they're very present and you can see them, but they're not raised. They're rather flat until you get to the bottom. And you can see that the midrib is slightly raised. Again, flip it over, take a look. Are there any flowers? This is a houseplant. Houseplants are really hard to flower because we're not giving them their proper environment. This is a tropical plant. I live in Pennsylvania. It's winter. It's cold. Not gonna flower for the most part, unless you're really, really good. But this doesn't have flowers. Maybe your plant does. Maybe you are drawing a flower and the rest of the plant is not connected. It's like a flower from a bouquet. That's okay. But take a look at the flower. How does the flower, if this did have a flower on it, how does that connect to the stem, right? Many flowers have little, almost leaf-like structures where they connect to the stem. And those are called sepals. Those sepals help to protect the bud. So take a look. Are there many leaves there at the base? What color are the petals? This may seem like a very obvious thing. A lot of us draw flowers because they're bright and colorful, but really take a look at that and see, are there any variations in it? So for example, I have here, you can see it's a green leaf, but the veins, right along the veins, have a reddish pink hue. Look at how those colors blend in with each other. Is it very stark contrast, or do they like softly gradient, like have a gradient and blend into each other? For example, tulips may have the gradients where it's orange at the base and then it turns into a beautiful red, or it's red with white streaking, very high contrast white streaks that go through it. Take a look at it. And finally, we're going to look at the reproductive structures. And while that may seem like, whew, that's a little awkward, it's really not. It's so prominent in many plants and we don't even think about it. For example, we're going to take a look at lilies next. They have such bright, bold reproductive structures of their pistils and their stamens, the male and female parts, and they're so obvious and they're so important to their reproduction and the continuation of the species. You want to make sure that you're including that. So take a look at the colors, the size. Are they super, super visible, like on a lily or even a rose? Or are they tucked inside the flower, very hard to see? You don't know. Let's take a look. So I threw a whole bunch of plant anatomy at you right then. I get it. Not everyone is a plant nerd. That's okay. But these are just things that if you're doing a botanical illustration, you're going to want to pay attention, and making these observations and learning these plant names are going to help you be able to draw even quicker in the future once you can identify them. We're going to focus on various anatomy here, and this is the lily picture. Very obvious reproductive structures. So the first portion of it is the lily, and it's just the reproductive pieces. The second, taller, thinner one is going to be looking at the rest of the plant. So we have this green tube-like structure, tall, and then it becomes like a vase right here. And that is going to be your female reproductive structure. This is called, the entire thing is a pistil. The very, very top, which you may see if you have lilies in your garden or you go by areas that do have lilies. There's a lot of orange daylilies just in ditches on the roadside. You can pull over, take a look. They might be very glossy or wet looking at the top, and that's to help pollen like stick to that. The pollen is going to move down the tube here. Move the picture. And that like tube-like area is called the style. Pollen's going to move down that tube until it gets to the ovary or the ovule. You see right here, these little tiny dots are the ovules, and this is the ovary. And if you think of in women, when women have a baby, you've got the baby growing in your ovaries. Same thing in the plants. And as the pollen goes in and fertilizes the seed that's growing, that's going to grow there, the seed is going to swell, it's going to become fertilized, and eventually the flower petals are going to fall off. The flower is going to look real gross and kind of brown and withered. The petals may fall off, but you'll be left with a swollen seed, fresh, ripe seed pod. That seed pod is going to have its method of dispersion, whether it's just going to dry up and fall off right there, or a bird's going to come and eat it and disperse it elsewhere as they fly away. Like a milkweed, is the seed going to have fluffy parts to it that get caught up in the wind like feathers and float away. You can also think there's some sticky ones. If you ever go out hiking in the woods in the fall with, you got fleece mittens on, or you take a dog with you and you come back and they're covered in like sticky, spiky seeds. Every seed has its own method of seed dispersion, but that's going to be where the seed ultimately comes from. Then we have our male parts, which are called the stamens collectively. So you have these here. There's often multiple male parts, the stamens, and often just one pistil or a female part. The very tippy top, and this is where the pollen is like coated. In a lily, again, it's very obvious. They're often an orangey or yellowy color. And you can even see the little pollen grains on it. The anther is at the very top, that swollen part. And then they're connected to a long stem looking thing called the filament. Then we've got our petals. Petals are pretty easy to identify. For the most part, they are the colored, fleshy, long bits. However, some plants like a dogwood or a poinsettia, those fleshy, long bits, colored bits, are actually called bracts, B-R-A-C-T. and they are petaloid. They're not actually petals, they're more leaf than petal, but for the most part, they're going to be petals. Then we have the sepals, and these are those leaf-like structures that protect the bud. And as the flower opens, it kind of pushes those little leaves out. If you think of like a rose bud that has those green petals around, and then the bud breaks, it pushes them down. And then we have the pedicel, which is the stem of the flower that's going to connect to the actual stem. So you can see it a little better in this one here, where the flower has this stem-looking thing that connects to the main stem. That stem-looking thing connecting the flower to the actual stem is the pedicel. We're going to have terminal buds, and that's the bud at the kind of very top. You have your node, again, which is where the leaf or the pedicel is going to connect to the stem. Internode is inter. It is just the space between the nodes. You have the blade, which is the leaf-looking piece itself. Remember that a leaf can have multiple leaflets. Then we have our petiole, which oftentimes at the node, you may see little like leaves or buds protruding from the node. We have our axillary buds, which are the buds that grow along the stem. Not your terminal bud that's at the very, very top, but you may see them at the node. Then we take a look at the root, and we have the one long root that shoots deep, deep, deep into the dirt. That's going to be your taproot. If you've ever tried to pull a dandelion up or a chicory, if you're looking for the chicory root to make coffee out of, you're going to see that long, long root. Then you have your lateral roots or your secondary roots that are going to be shooting off from the primary or taproot. And that whole collective thing is just the root system. All right. We've gone through the sciencey, the super sciencey portion. So let's start the illustration. And we're going to start with just shapes. So now you can take out your paper. We've looked at our plants. You've looked at the plant in front of you. I've looked at my plant. Let's just start sketching out really simple shapes. This is going to be a really messy step. No erasing here. If you feel like, ooh, I messed up there, just sketch on over top of it. We are going to really focus on erasing later when we get to future steps. So let's go, and you can start drawing or sketching out your own, but look at the shape of the plants. Do you have lots of circles? For example, this shown here is a crocus. Lots of ovals at the top and really long cylinders of the leaves. Just take a look at the overall shapes. We all know how to draw a circle. We all know how to draw a rectangle. And that's what your plant is made of. It's just a whole bunch of those with little variations in them. So for example, if I'm starting my pothos, this is how messy I am. I don't draw one fluid line. So we have it dry, and I always start with the pencil, that fine pencil. And then we take a look at our nodes. How do the plants come out and connect? They're going to connect along the top. And again, it's just very, very messy. And then we have pretty much hearts. And again, super messy. Don't worry about that. Boom. This can be really quick. It's just a sketch. Then you're going to add, once you have your sketch out, you're going to add those details to existing shapes. So for example, if you have the reproductive structures, this would be the time to do it. If you take your heart shape here or your oval shape in the crocus here and now add that little, there's like a little dissection or slit at the top of a crocus petal, this is when you add it. Erasing in this step can be pretty helpful. And in my drawing, I have the ability to create multiple layers. So that's kind of helpful. I can add a layer over top so that I always have this sketch base. And then later, I can just get rid of it. And now you're going to want to really, it's less lightweight. So really use your pencil, but it's still a pencil step, right? But now we're going to be really creating that overall shape. See the difference? It's that one smooth line as compared to a messy sketch. You're also going to see, you can see here at the base how instead of just the quick swooshes that connect, now we're really having that pucker. And you can see I still have, it still looks kind of messy and it's still messed up, and that's okay. This is the step that you can erase in and make sure that it is exactly the way you want it to look. But this is not even the final step. So take a look at if you're going to include roots, if you're going to include your sepals. You can see on this here that where this is a vine, it looks like a vine, right? It's a viney plant. You can see that where the new leaf is going to come out is kind of a whitish raised area. If you look right there, you can see that. And in the old leaves, you can see that kind of like scar where the prior leaf has broken out of. So this would be the step that you include those. This would be the step that you look at the nodes and you say, oh, I see how there's like little raised portions at the nodes. And then, right at the node here, we have little bumps. Those bumps on my plants are actually the starts of something called aerial roots. And they are exactly what they sound like. They're little bitty root structures that are okay to not be in soil. They like to be in the air, and they will help the plant to climb, and they'll adhere to various surfaces. So this plant likes climbing trees and other plant structures around it in the wild, and they will use those aerial roots to kind of suction themselves and stick onto those plants to help them rise up. They don't harm the plant. They don't suffocate the plant. They're just sticking to it. And those roots can also help in gas exchange and moisture collection in the air. Take a look at your sepals. Take a look at your reproductive structures. Many of them, unless it's the lily where they're really obvious, you're probably not going to see them well enough to include them in your messy sketch. But now that you're looking at more of the details and you're really paying attention, this is the step to really make sure that you include them. Also take a look at your petal or your leaf margins. Again, my margins are whole. They don't have teeth. They don't have serration. They don't have lobes. The crocus does though, and you can see that at this star here where the crocus has that dissection at the top. Make sure that you're adding those now. And take a look at leaf venation and angles. this is going to be how are your leaves tilted, right? You can see some leaves like this one are facing forwards, while others, like this one here, is facing to the side. Some, like this one here, is facing back at me. Look at how the leaves are tilted. Pay attention to that right now. And now is the good time to start drawing your veins in your leaves as well. So mine has just a midrib. And then it has all sorts of little tiny ones. And remember, little tiny itty bitty not to be seen, still present. If you look closely enough, you may want to use a smaller size pencil, lighter strokes. Things like that. Okay. And like I said, erasing, this is the step that you erase. That way you can really see what your details are. Now we've got some fun illustration details, just some things to be aware of as you draw to help you. This is your artistic freedom is coming in here. You want to keep things in mind as you are creating your piece so that you are creating something that's visually pleasing. It's not just an exact copy of the plant in front of you, or it's not an exact copy of the photo that you're drawing from. Because out in nature, things can grow any which way. Nature is chaos, but it's beautiful chaos. But your drawing is purposeful. So the first thing to avoid, and I'm going to be demonstrating these as well. First thing to avoid or to be conscientious of is you don't want 3 lines transecting in one spot. You're going to have multiple lines. Like think if you're drawing your, let me draw it a little bigger so everyone can see it well. You're drawing your flower, right? And you have the stem of your flower. And then you've got beautiful flower on top. And we're just going to draw it really quick for you, right? You've got your flower and you've got your stem. Well, the flower has leaves, right? So we have a leaf that's going over top and a leaf that's going behind. And then we're going to go in and we're going to erase to show that dimension, to show that there's one in front and one in the back. Right? So it can take a little bit of time. So I've got one in the front. That's the stem. It's in front of the stem. Make sure you keep all your lines straight in your head. And also keep in mind as you're drawing, it may seem intimidating at first to be drawing scientifically, but it's really a matter of how much time do you take? How much do you truly observe before you start, right? You could take 100 hours on a piece and include all the little facets and details and not be a professional artist, right? Just keep in mind that slow and steady wins the race here. Now we have a leaf in front. Okay. So we've got our flower in the back there, our leaf in the front, our leaf behind that one. Looks kind of weird. That may be what you see in nature, what's going on with your plant. That may be the case. This is where you have artistic freedom to say, well, I'm not changing the plant structure. I'm not changing anything about it. But, oh, I should have done them in different layers. But look right here. How many lines are intersecting? We have one line, 2 line, 3 lines. That shouldn't happen. That looks funny. That just, in our brains, we have a hard time psychologically. When we look at a picture like that, we have a really hard time being able to figure out now, whoa, there's too many lines crisscrossing. We have a hard time figuring out and seeing which line goes where. And you may say, no, it doesn't take a long time. I can figure it out really quickly. But milliseconds of action in our brain that don't need to be there confuses the brain. And in our heads, we'll say, there's something about that that's just off that I don't like. And that's your brain taking that extra millisecond or two to try to figure out what's going on. Whereas if we just move the leaf a little bit, right? So we still have our flower. Same flower as last time. Same flower. And we have the same leaf, right? There's a leaf there that's swooshing to that side, and we have a leaf. We're going to bend the leaf a different direction so that it's now facing up. Although I like it better. There we go, if it's a little closer. Okay, so now we're going to erase because we're at that step of our drawing. There we go. The hard part about working with digital illustration is making sure you're on the right layer. You don't have to worry about that on pen and paper. So, ta-da. We now have something that looks, in our brains, our brain doesn't need to take the extra millisecond to figure out what's what. There's only 2 lines that ever transect. Here and here. We've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right? 2 lines is okay. Our brains can figure that out really easily. We're still including the leaves, right? We're still including both leaves. You just unbent one of them. That's all you did. You didn't change any of its properties. You didn't change its anatomy in any way, shape, or form. You just moved it so it would look better and be a more pleasing picture. The second one is points touching. And this may seem very similar to the previous one, and it is very similar. But if we have, this is with leaves, we've got a plant with leaves, right? And we have another plant with leaves. Again, our brains look at this and we're like, wait, what's going on? It doesn't look that great. Mainly because of right here, right? The points of these leaves from 2 different plants are just barely touching. Our brains would much prefer if they overlapped. So, all we do is we move it ever so slightly, right? You can have the same exact plant, the same exact shape, right? You're not unbending anything, but now just overlap it, right? Same thing, but now right there, right here, our brains are a lot happier because we can figure out where things start and where they stop very easily. We don't have to take that extra millisecond. All right, and then the last one is you don't want too many parallel lines. This may seem very simple, and if you think of like daffodils or plants that have one tall, thick stalk with the flower on top and then lots of linear leaves, we may see a lot of parallel lines in nature, but the brain has a hard time with that one as well. We have a hard time counting everything and being able to see how many numbers there are there. So for example, we have our flower, beautiful flower, I know. And we have our leaves. So we have leaf 1, leaf 2, and leaf 3. And we go in and we say the leaf is behind the flower. So we erase, right? Leaves are behind the flower. Cool. But there's still something about that the brain doesn't like. And it's obviously not the transecting lines, right? We don't have 3 lines that are transecting. We have things that are overlapped and not just barely touching. So what could it be? Well, is that there's so many parallel lines. Like if you look at the bottom here, how many lines do you see? You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. But there's clearly not 8 things. So our brain is like, what is happening? But if all we do is, again, this time instead of unbending things, we want to bend them. So now we do that. And whoop, that's barely touching, which we don't want to do. And now we are behind the flower still. This makes the brain a lot happier. They are no longer the too many parallel lines. We have some dimension. The brain is a lot happier. You're still including the same 3 leaves. We're not changing the science. And finally, we have our pretty plant picture here. We don't want something that is too in the corner, right? You don't want your flower or your vines to look as if they're coming right out of the corner. Like this leaf right here is just popping right out of the corner. Instead, take your piece and there we go. We move it to the middle. That way leading lines aren't going directly to the corners. If we look at the leading lines here, we have one is going there, going up. This is going down here. Nothing is going directly into the corners. So try to avoid that. All right, there's your basic things to avoid. Finally, we're going to get to, you guys probably taken the time, sketched things out, started creating those little details. We're going to do shading. All right. Oh, there we go. So we can start with coloring and taking a look at how does light play with our leaves? How does shading happen? Shading is going to help you be able to create dimension, to create some shape. So for example, with the crocus, you can see the petals. As the light comes through the petal, you can see the shadow here at the bottom where the light doesn't pass through because there's more petals on the other side. You can see how the leaves are overlaid on each other with the shadows that they cast on the leaves surrounding them, right? If the leaves are folding over, how does this part of the leaf look? Is that shaded? Is this bright light? Or is this the part that's facing away? Is the light coming up from the bottom and now this part is illuminated and this part is shaded? Take a look at that. You can use your pencil to just lightly add those shadows, and they will act kind of as a guide for when you ink and when you color. All right, so now that you've added those little shading marks, we're going to start the process of creating our finished image. We're going to ink it in, and that's pretty much creating a coloring page, right? If you think of a coloring page, it's on that white printer paper, and there's just these big black lines, that's pretty much what you're making now. You're going to ink, take your pen, right? Take your pen and trace over those bolder pencil marks, that final thing. And ink just looks more professional than the pencil does. It's going to be a finer shape. And then you're going to let that dry, right? It doesn't take long to dry, a couple seconds, but don't immediately start erasing over top of what you just inked. Otherwise, you could smudge the ink. But once that ink is dry, erase all of your pencil, right? The shading, you're going to see, the nice thing about erasing is it's not going to get rid of exactly everything. But that's okay, right? You'll still be able to see faint pencil lines. You're going to still see the shadows that you had. Once you've finished inking, you erase it. And now you're going to be able to choose your colors, right? If for the crocus here, maybe I have, how many colors? I could have a whole bunch of colors. But maybe my crocus petals are a combination of purples, blues, and grays, right? For the hellebore here, you can see that there's some beige undertones, yellows in the reproductive structures. So choose your pencils, and now we'll get started. Don't draw really, really hard because we want to be able to blend. Again, I mentioned the colored pencils. I find them to be the easiest to work with, more than crayon is. And start with a very general base color. So for me, I am going to start with a deep muted green. And I have my outline here, and really, I can get rid of the sketch now, right? There we go. I'm just going to make sure I'm in the right layer. Then I'm going to start with my base. There we go. And then again, digital drawing is nice because I have the ability to erase even the colored portion. So I have the flexibility to be a little more messy. Which is nice. I'm a messy artist. I like having a nice, detailed, finished piece, but the process can be a little painful. And that's okay. Ooh, I missed the spot there. And the other nice thing about digital drawing is I can do this, right? I can zoom out, take a look. I can zoom really far in, which makes things really nice. Okay, so we've got our basic base layer, one color. Now we add more layers to it, thinking of where those shadows would have been, how other colors, we took a look at that pink and green plant. Is that right along the midrib? How does that blend with each other? And use those other colors to now add those shadows and highlights. So for mine, I have more shadows along the midrib. You can, I'm selecting a darker green because it's a shadow, right? So we want darker than the base. And then you're going to blend. You can either blend just by coloring very lightly over top of it. You can blend by using your fingers and like rubbing the different colors into each other. Smudge sticks work well for that as well. If you have like scrap paper, You can twist it up into a stick and then smudge it into each other. Smudge it so you're not getting the color on your fingers. I don't mind. I am fine having color all over myself, but some people don't enjoy that. So using a smudge stick could help as well, or just continuing to add those layers, layer after layer. So we have our dark shading layer. Now we're going to have the highlights, and looking at how the light hits these plants. It's from the top. And these are glossy. The plant that I'm drawing from is a very glossy plant, so it almost looks shiny. So the way the light hits that plant makes it look a lot paler, almost as if there's white pieces, white portions, because of how the light is hitting it. So remember to keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind of how is the light hitting the plant. And obviously it's going to change throughout the day. So keeping that snapshot in your mind of how the light is hitting the plant. You know, you can't draw a plant, one picture that shows how the light moves and changes throughout the day. So just pick one moment in time when you added those pencil guides in there and shade that way. All right, so we've got some shadows and some highlights in there. Right, but now this leaf is now 3 different colors instead of that one base color, but it definitely helps to add some dimension and some layering. As you are choosing the color to select for your shadowing, keep in mind that there is no like real black in nature. So you're not really going to want to select black to shade with. That doesn't exist. The pigments for black, I mean, if you think of even in people with black hair, that melanin, if you look in a certain light, you can see red and brown tones underneath of that. There is no true black in nature. So you don't want to be using black as a shading tool unless you're doing it really, really lightly. That allows some of that base color to shine through. So you don't want, if you're drawing a black orchid or a black petunias, right now, black petunias are kind of all the rage here. If you look at them in certain lights, it's actually red. It's just so deeply saturated with that red pigment that it looks black when you just like hold it. But in bright sun, afternoon sun, you can see that it's truly like a deep burgundy color. So using just darker of the main color, if you're drawing, you know, the crocus there, having the different purples to be able to say, that's how I'm gonna shade. You're gonna shade with just that darker purple or dark blue is going to help make more of a realistic look. Never use only black. Again, it can be in a nice layer, but not by itself. Hopefully then you have your finished piece. Once you've done all of the steps, you've taken the time to draw. And again, take your time. For most of us, this is something we do as a hobby just to learn more about plants and to learn how to observe them in a different way and learn patterns between the various plants to recognize family groupings and just to enjoy the natural world. Many of us aren't going to be watching an introductory botanical class if you have commissions and deadlines lined up. So take your time. You know, focus on those details. Go back and ask yourself questions. Is this really how this leaf looks? Remember, you may not be a professional artist, but if you're paying attention to those details and making those observations and taking the time to really, you're recording data as you draw, you're going to come out with a really scientifically accurate looking piece. And that is awesome. That is what you want. I didn't even mention one of the most important parts, at least that I think is really important, is to sign and date it, right? So signing it may not be the biggest of deal, but dating it is. And again, if we're thinking of this piece as a scientific piece, it's a portion of data. It is quantifiable now. And 2 years from now, when you are flipping through your sketchbook, right? You're flipping through and you're seeing all the pieces that you've done over time. You can look at those dates and say, wow, I started my botanical journey in January of 2021, and now it is June of 2021. Look at the improvement that I made over those few months. Okay, now it's 2024, and you've been doing this for a couple of years now. Go back and look at that sketch. Look at your first piece and say, wow, look at this. Because piece to piece, you may not feel as if you're improving, but looking at your piece from a while ago can really help to encourage you and show you just how much you have improved over time. So being able to date your piece is really important to help you keep in mind how you have improved over time. So don't forget that. But thank you so much for watching. This is the Intro to Botanical Illustration course that I offer. There are other courses available in the series. I have some more advanced plant anatomy or focusing on flowers or fungus. So if you would like to watch those are also available to you. You can visit my website at www.theartofecology.com. Ta-da! Here is my scientific illustration portion on the website, but you'll also be able to view other courses available for download, view my calendar of events, see if there's an in-person or virtual program where you can ask questions, you can draw right alongside me. And you can also support me by looking at some of my illustration prints, getting some to inspire you, or I have stickers. I love stickers. So getting yourself an illustration sticker will help to support the Art of Ecology and help keep programs like this coming to you. Again, thank you so much. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest at the Art of Ecology.